I'm Harrison.
And I'm Ameer, and we believe that one of life's most valuable assets is the gift of conversation.
In the midst of life, sometimes we forget the true power of a deep, meaningful conversation.
So take a breath, come join us,
and let's talk about life. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Let's Talk About Life podcast. My name is Harrison King.
And my name's Ameer Corro.
And we are talking about something Ameer doesn't know what we're talking about today. I've been thinking about this, as the days progressed, and I was like, we're going to change it up a little bit. We've been talking about some good kind of life things this whole point, but there's something that we haven't discussed, and I want to just throw it out there, and I want you to start. What are your thoughts on the supernatural? So I'm talking spirits. I'm talking if you want to get into like kind of ghosts, even. Mm-hmm. We want to go that kind of possession route, which is always talked about in horror movies, but a lot of there's positive things to this, and I'm curious your thoughts. That's all I'm giving you.
Gotcha. Ooh, he threw it up. Just so y'all know, we didn't talk about we were going to talk about what we were going to talk about this week. So I'm going to do my best.
Not the show. Yeah. Just supernatural occurrences, events. What's your first?
Oh, Dean from Supernatural. First thought, in all honesty, I'm not like a super big, I guess, believer or proponent, or I'm not like super into like the supernatural or things like that. I think when I was Catholic, because I was born and raised Catholic, I think I definitely was a lot more kind of in that realm, because you combine like the Catholic upbringing with the Filipino superstitious upbringing. Like that was a big part kind of of like my life growing up. It's like, if the spoon falls, then that means that you're gonna have a male guest, and if you drop a fork, it's gonna be a female. I think I might be reversed. But yeah, I think when I was younger growing up, I think that was a bigger part of my consciousness than it is now. Right now, I'm not too big in that realm. I think I'm less in the supernatural and more just in the spiritual, and not necessarily spiritual in the sense of like a belief structure, but more so spiritual in a sense of like a way of going through life and, embracing whatever comes at you. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I'm curious to hear where you are.
Yeah. I've recently had this conversation with somebody, and I don't think I've ever talked about it like publicly. So I think it's an interesting thing. So in grade 12, I did a project, and the assignment was just to do a presentation, 10-15 minute presentation on literally anything. And I was like, I'm going to do it on ghosts. That was me. That's what I said. So it turned out that my mom knew somebody, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter who it is. But her daughter can see spirits or ghosts. And I didn't talk to her, but I talked to the mom. And I had about like an hour and a half, 2 hour long conversation. She told me all these stories. And I used to be pretty skeptical about this stuff. I didn't really believe it. But having heard it firsthand and all the things that she explained to me, it really changed how I thought about some of this stuff. So I'll tell you a couple things, and then we can just kind of debrief. And let me say that I don't know if there's a distinct yes or no, like some people experience things, whatever. It could be something else. Nobody really knows, right? I just think it's cool to think about. And it makes it, I don't know, I think it's kind of fun to think that we're not just this realm kind of happening. So the most notable one is back home in grade like 3 or 4, there's a certain place that we go. It's like a historical site, and there was like a big battle there, right? It's the Battle of Batoche. I don't know how much you know about that, but it's a thing in the prairies, and they went for the trip. It's a school trip, and they were talking all about what had happened, and like I don't know if it was, I think it was like the general or something. They were talking about him, and this girl goes, "Oh, that's him right there at the top at the front of the church." And they were like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, well, he's wearing blah, 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 blah." And they described him, and they were like, that's who we're talking about, but there's nobody up there. And she's like, "Well, he's up there. He has no feet. He's up at the front of the church, but he's got no feet." And they were like, they didn't understand what was going on. They're like, "I don't know. She's a kid. Maybe she's just saying stuff." But this happened continued to happen, and they realized that the parents, and they realized that she was seeing spirits, and they always appeared with no feet. Like they went to about, mid calf kind of thing, and then they were just floating. They were a little translucent, right? And the other notable one that I found interesting was she was on the phone. The mom was on the phone. Friend called her in the morning, early morning, and her dad had been dealing with, I don't know, cancer or some sort of disease, and it was in the hospital. And then, a friend had called to say my dad passed away last night, or this morning, whatever. Well, I think it was recently, right, this morning. And whatever, she ends up, puts the call down, and gets a call from upstairs from her daughter, who's like, "Where's the guy, the bagpipe player from school? He's up in your office." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "No, he's up in your office here, the bagpipe player from school." And this man who had she just got a call that this friend's dad died. The dad used to play bagpipes for Remembrance Day at her kid's school. And she was like, "Yeah, he's in uniform just like he would be in Remembrance Day." And this was like minutes after she just got this phone call. She hadn't told anybody. This kid had no idea what was going on, yet she was like, "He's here up in the room." And there were many, many occasions. I have, other stories that she shared, and it went on forever. But it got to a point, for me as a listener, and then reflecting on it, it's like there's a point where you can't argue that it's a coincidence anymore because of some of the things that she was explaining. And then turned out that her grandma, this kid's grandma, had a similar thing. Sometimes it runs in the family, and they were able to kind of bond over it, and they learned how to, it was kind of scary. You're a kid, you're seeing things that other people aren't seeing. And that there's more to it, but that's kind of what changed my mind about it, where it's like, okay, I had never heard somebody, other than like a movie where it's like based on a true story. I I had never heard of a first person kind of account of these things happening. So that's a very long explanation, but that's why I brought this up, because that's where I'm at. I think it's fully possible, and I think all those things. Now, horror movies specifically are always talking about the bad things, but I think there's a lot of good stuff, that, or just it's definitely possible that we just don't have the sense to view things that are no longer living in this realm. That's my conclusion. There you go.
Gotcha. Damn, that's that's a really interesting story. That's really crazy. It reminds me of I have this one friend. I work with her. One of my coworkers and good friends. She also she has told me, and I've of course always been skeptical and stuff. But she has told me that she's also a seer as well, and she's
Mm,
actually like studying and like training, to like go into that. Um, like and she says like as a kid, like she saw like these like spirits or whatever, whatever it was, and then she like her like family to believe her, and like then she went to therapy instead, and and all
right.
that kind of stuff. um I don't know. I think I've still always kind of been skeptical, because I think there's a lot of I think the entire correlation causation thing,
Hmm.
I think is kind of like where I'm approaching from. It's like, like coincidences, lots of c words: coincidences, correlation, causation, coinky dink, you
Yeah.
know, all that kind of stuff. So I'm
Hmm.
still a skeptic, but I think the more interesting question to the interesting question to ask in regards to, perhaps like all these supernatural forces and everything, is okay. So whether so if they do exist or if they don't, or like whatever our paradigm is, how will that influence kind of the way that we carry ourselves and the way that we approach
There
life?
you go. What do you think?
So okay. Well, to answer my own question,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to hear.
I think whether they do or don't exist won't change too much of the way I conduct myself.
Hmm.
Anyways, I think I'm just gonna keep on doing me.
Right.
Honestly, it's like, okay, like if I were in that position, it's like, okay, well, I can see a spirit. Okay. Anyways,
Right.
let me
It
just
doesn't
continue
affect you.
on, exactly. There's part of me that's still skeptical. It's like, could it possibly be a form of psychosis?
Of course.
Yeah, I think about, all those different things, and then yeah, and like how the human brain like is a meaning making machine, which means that we can
Mhm.
derive meaning from like sometimes things that don't inherently have any meaning, and then,
Mhm.
extrapolate from that something else. But like bring it back to the question that I asked myself that I'm now answering, I think whether or not whether or not like there is a supernatural realm, it won't really change too much of how I behave anyways, and so it's not
Yeah.
like too big of a concern on my part. What about you? Like how do you
No,
find
it's not
like
like
yeah.
something I think about daily,
Mhm.
right? I just
Mhm.
I do pun I would move it more over to you'd kind of mentioned like the spiritual realm, which is like this, I guess. I don't know how I think of things more in energy sources, which is this is all connected to that. I I mean, I personally believe through my learnings and all kinds of different experiences and whatever that we are there's something beyond this this experience that we can um like sense with the five senses we have, right? I think this is something that I do think about that there's animals that can see colors we can't see because we just don't have the capabilities of doing it. I think there's something else going on. It might be in right here, like we can't even fathom what's going on because we don't have any form of reference point. But I think we don't have the sense to even know some things that are going on around us, specifically energetic fields which would relate to this type of thing because no like energy stuff, a lot of it can be measured. A lot of people refuse to acknowledge that it's true, but I don't know if you know anything about like Joe Dispenza. he's
I've
like
heard.
he's like
I've
real
heard of
life
Joe Dispenza.
Jesus.
Mhm.
He's just a
Uh-huh.
doctor who's learned how to manipulate energy essentially, and he's healed people from cancer on the spot and it's legitimately gone. There's ways you can do things and people are like, oh, it's like magic or whatever. No, it's just something that the average person is not really thinking about, and we've been like kind of, I think, trained to believe is fake or not possible. It's not something that we've grown up with as being like a possibility maybe. So that's where I come from. I again don't know necessarily as far as like ghosts go when you say like transparent, like she was talking about transparent kind of images of people. Maybe that's just a form of some sort of sense that she could have. She has a little heightened something or other that she could see that. I don't know, but personally, I think believing that makes me feel comforted because, like you said, it doesn't really affect you or not. I think even if let me put it this way. So we have somebody was talking about believing in God, and I relate to this, not on the God sense, but he was like, "Listen, I don't know if God's real, but I know that my life will be better when if I live my life believing that God exists, my life will be better than if I just didn't at all." I know that it might not be true, but me at least giving myself the ability to or the allowing myself to believe it will result in a better life. That's what he believes, and I agree with that. Not in maybe the God sense for me, but for this kind of spiritual, energetic stuff. Believing when you sit down, I can like talk to the universe and feel like there's something out there that I'm not alone gives me a sense of peace. So that's what I think. Mm.
Yeah, no, I like that. I relate to that. Yeah, I very much relate to that. I'm curious, like, what has your own, I guess, journey been like spiritually? Like, do you have any experiences like with religion or anything like that?
Mm.
Like, what has kind of led you kind of to where you currently are at in kind of like the spiritual sense?
Right. I My grandparents are both sides of my grandparents are very are Christian. So my parents were through association. Basically, growing up, that's all they knew. We used to go to church when I was really young, and then we kind of stopped. And my family doesn't really practice religion. I think my parents may call themselves Christians. I'm not actually sure. We haven't talked about it. I don't because I don't agree personally with a lot of the religious side of things, in the sense that I think of religion as kind of a rule book. all religions are generally talking about the same thing, which I would refer to as spirituality. So I would say I practice and think about spirituality with the absence of a religion, if that makes any sense, which is essentially
Mhm.
Buddhism, right? Kind of like that's, and I don't know that much. I'm not even able to talk about Buddhism, but from my knowledge, that's essentially what it is, right? And it's like you you are the host of the religion personally, and then you figure out how to, you know, um, you're on your own spiritual journey without, outside forces. So that's where I'm at. I am not again, this is all just personal, and I'm not like attacking other religion or anything. I think there's valid place for all things like that. Um, I like having the absence of like outside rules where I get to kind of, like we talked about last week, figure things out as what's working for me and what's not. So that's kind of where I've come to, and that's just been a accumulation of a lot of just different learning, like through life and listening to people talk, and it all kind of started with a book I read. It's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Have you ever heard of it?
Mhm.
Yeah, have you read it?
Mhm. I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. It's on
That
my
was
list.
like the start of this whole personal growth spiritual journey. That was it. I read it in grade 12, and that was like the start. And then I started like meditating regularly, and just it really changed my perspective on the way I thought about life. I don't know why, just something clicked. And I've just been interested in that and bettering myself, and it all kind of just leads in some way, shape, or form to spirituality, because it's like, if you want to talk about the hierarchy and needs and whatever, self-actualization is at the top. So everything's going to eventually lead there at some way, shape, or form. So that's kind of where I'm at, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Totally relate. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like, kind of like I relate to what you said in the sense of like free of the rule book and being able to determine it yourself,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think everybody, at least when I've talked to people from different religions, and I've taken a religion class in school here, and it seems like in general, the be a good person, treat others nicely. That kind of stuff is all pretty similar throughout almost all religions, right? It's a generalization, but generally, right? Um, and I don't think I personally need that for me to practice that. I can take different things and put it together. It doesn't have to be like you have to follow these exact rules, which is why I do that. And I actually think, interestingly enough, a lot of people in our generation feel that way when I've talked to them. Have you found that?
Definitely. And
Yeah.
I think it's part and parcel due to, I guess, the I guess I think in large part the internet and kind of like
Mm,
the democratization of knowledge and kind of like exposure to different cultures. Because
yeah.
keep in mind, before in the 50s, if you wanted to learn about, let's say, Hinduism, or you wanted to learn about Sikhism, you had to like go to the library. But even then, that probably wouldn't be enough. Someone who wrote the book would have to like travel there, have to go
Mhm.
figure it all out themselves, and then
Totally.
bring a limited piece of that back. Right. But we have the internet now. You can literally go on YouTube and like learn anything about any religion, essentially.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of opened us up to the possibility, or not necessarily possibility, but the reality of the many different worldviews that exist, and perhaps their compatibility and how interconnected they all are. As you said, like the principles underlying them, are the same essentially. Like, as a sweeping generalization, of course, I'm not including, you know, perhaps. I think what it is religion is an access point to the same, like, while the path may be different, kind of they're all leading toward the same thing,
Yeah, that's
you
a good way
know?
of putting it.
Which is kind of, as you mentioned, that self-actualization, that hierarchy of needs. And perhaps in some contexts it might not be self-actualization in the form of I'm increasing the self, but perhaps self-actualization in the sense of, oh, I'm diminishing my sense of self, diminishing my ego, as in, as in Zen, and the different sects of Buddhism, and all that, all the different sectors. Um yeah, I think it's all kind of just leading towards the same thing with vastly different paths on how to get there. But I think what happens is that, like, oftentimes, in terms of, and I'm talking about like generally throughout history, sometimes we as people get so caught up in the path and like turning around to other people and saying, hey, your path isn't right. Hey, your path isn't right. You're not on
Right.
my path, right? But then without realizing that we're all headed towards the same place,
Yeah,
and then we
interesting.
get caught up in the path battle and then we're trying to pull people over. And then we have, all this conflict and stuff. But I think recognizing that the destination is the same, I think that's especially crucial for kind of finding that peace. And to answer your question, in our generation, I think the democratization of knowledge through the internet and also exposure to different cultures has kind of created that world view of, hey, I can take the principles, I can find the destination and not worry too much about the path and create my own path.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't know like what the statistics are, if that's like 100% accurate. Just the people that I've talked to, at least,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it's more common than obviously long ago, and that makes a lot of sense. I haven't thought about it that way. We have access to it's what we have access to. Learning about all that. So obviously more people are feeling similarly because first of all, we're able to share our opinions and talk about it like we are right now,
Mm-hmm.
and just access learn about anything you want because before it was like whatever was around you is what you knew because there was limited ways of learning other things unless you were to like move to India and experience the culture. You're not gonna be able to really understand it. Well, now I mean it's still I guess the same because watching a YouTube video is not gonna be the exact same, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a little better. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting topic, and I want to just really hit home again that I'm not like um trying to say other like religion is bad or any of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I'm just talking from personal experience. I think there's a lot of good thing because it's religion is kind of like he said a path or like the host for spirituality, like kind of what we're talking about here. Um, it's a great thing because it makes it accessible for people, right? A lot of people, if they don't want to try to seek that just totally by themselves, there's a place to do it, which is great. And people that practice religion have a better sense of purpose and generally live longer, and
Mm-hmm.
that is been studied and researched,
Statistically,
right?
yeah.
So it's there's definitely something to it. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes along with it. Yeah. What was your transition out of, if you don't mind talking about it, out of,
Mm-hmm.
you said you were Catholic, right? You grew up?
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you'd ask. This is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about. Actually, kind of
Oh, look at
figuring
that.
out. I'm happy you asked. This is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about, and probably the one that I've thought about the most,
Mm.
or at least like read like did my research and tried to read up on it. Rolling down my sleeves.
Oh, look at this. Prepared.
Yeah. So the story. Basically, I was born to a Catholic family. And of course, if you're Filipino, like I forget the statistics exactly, but majority of the Philippines is Catholic.
Hmm.
Large majority of the Philippines is Catholic, small minority of Protestant Christians, and then also another minority of Muslims in the South. And so I'm born into the majority Catholic, and I was baptized. I even went to a Catholic private school, a Catholic all boys school. And as a kid, I wanted to be a priest. And so in
Wow.
like at home and stuff, I learned like all the rites and stuff. I would literally pretend priest, you know.
Wow.
Um like I learned all the prayers and everything, like the mystery of faith and and all that kind of stuff.
That's so
If you're
interesting.
Catholic, you'll know all that kind of stuff. And I would play around with that. I would take a rice cracker as the host and like my little plastic goblet filled with juice, and I'd like do the entire like
Yeah.
communion rites and everything.
Yeah.
And I was really into it. That's what I wanted to do. And so in grade 7, I left Catholic school to go to a public school.
Hmm.
And kind of in doing so, I was like, keep in mind, like throughout my life I was always exposed to Christianity, but it was never really an option for me because I it was outside of my family circle,
Mm.
right? So I went to public school, um met new friends, met girls. It was, life
Right.
expanded for me from my all boys Catholic school days. And so, life was really expanding. So I was, one of my friends is part of a denomination of Christian called Seventh Day Adventists, and so I kind of heard more about that. I was interested in that, and so I you know converted from like Catholic to Seventh Day Adventist, and I started to go to their church as well. Eventually, my mom came with me, and kind of like that's kind of where we got plugged in, and we were able to find a community there, and we like really deeply resonated kind of with what was being taught there, and kind of like the way of doing things. It's what worked for us. Again, I'm not saying that anything's
Yeah,
better or worse.
yeah.
It was just what worked for my family, and my mom still goes to this church to this day. It's like 6 blocks away, 7 blocks away. Made so many good friends from it.
Can
Midway
you
through,
explain that? Sorry to
mm,
interrupt you. Can you
yeah,
explain
of
the
course.
difference between the kind of the major differences between those two? Because
Of
I have no
course.
idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So Catholics, I think Catholicism is pretty self-explanatory. It's one of the major world religions. They worship on Sundays predominantly. There's a priest who's kind of like the intercessor between the people and God. With the Seventh Day Adventist Church, they worship on Saturdays, which is the traditional like Jewish Shabbat, right? Which is the seventh day of the week, and that's why they're Seventh Day Adventists. There's not really like in most non-denominate well, like most Protestant Christianity, there are obviously exceptions, of course, with everything. There's no priest per se. There's no intercessor. It's kind of your own personal relationship with God, and then there's a pastor, who's like teaching and like doing that thing. But it's mainly like your own relationship. You don't need to like go to a priest to get forgiven,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. It's just like that's kind of the main difference. The day of worship is the big difference. And so, mid 2017, when I was in grade 11 or 12, grade 12, yeah, in grade 12, no, yeah, grade 12, I found this one non-denominational church on YouTube, and they were from Vancouver, and I really resonated kind of like with the pastor's sermons and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel this so strongly. Like he was super passionate. It was like listening to Gary Vaynerchuk speak. I was like pulled in. I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And so I went to check out that church. I really loved the people there. I got plugged into that, and kind of for a multitude of different reasons. I don't like ever, talking bad about anyone or everything. The people were lovely. Just due to a handful of different reasons, I decided to leave. And when I left, I was, I guess, kind of really jaded
Hmm.
in terms of the jaded in regards to kind of like Christianity and religion and everything. And so I decided to kind of go out on my own spiritual exploration. And so that summer, I like took out all the books on like philosophy. I read a whole bunch of books on like different world religions. I read about Islam. I read about Judaism. I read about Buddhism. I read about Sikhism, Hinduism. Like just trying to study all the different world religions, and like kind of realizing, whoa, as we mentioned before, we're all kind of like leading towards the same destination. And since then, I've kind of like been on my own path of finding what works for me, whether that's, for a while I was like really big on like law of attraction and stuff. For me now, not so much anymore. And like there's an ebb and flow kind of to, I guess, the spiritual journey. It's not like a set linear thing, but there's an
Hmm.
ebb and flow. Different things come in and they come out. Um, but I'd say kind of the big fundamental switch that has kind of like cemented everything and kind of like in a snap moment kind of just aligned everything for me was reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Like when I read that, that kind of just like it just resonated with me so deeply, and I was like, whoa, this is what I was looking for this entire time. And kind of I've been very comfortably kind of in this space of now, you know, in this kind of like very present oriented just way of going about life.
Hmm.
And it's where I see myself for a long time. Of course, I'm always open to, as things change, if perhaps I get exposed to something new, and then perhaps my beliefs might change, and you know all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of what has led me to where I am now, the long story.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Uh,
that's my story.
Wow, that's interesting. Do you ever call yourself religious now, or you
No.
removed yourself from that term? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say I'm definitely like, I mean, I don't really like have too much use for like titles in terms of
Mhm,
like
mhm.
descriptors in terms of spiritual practices and stuff. But if I were to, I'd just say, spiritual,
Yeah,
or even more so, I'd just say here, you know,
there you go. Look at that. Yeah, I think
fully
that's
here.
what's interesting about this is that it's such a wide range of, like, experience that
Hmm.
determines all of this. Like, it's hard to just put a title on it. People say religion,
Hmm.
it's gonna give a different reaction from every person because everybody's gonna think about something different, right?
Hmm.
For me, like I said, I'm gonna think of kind of the rules that come along with religion. Some people are gonna say, "Wow, God changed my life. I love it." Like there's so many different things, and it's all under the same umbrella. Like what you just talked about, reading philosophy is totally right down the same path. But um, I think it's kind of I knew we would get to this kind of conversation, and that's why I think it's important to talk about because I don't find, at least in my own circle, we're talking about this kind of thing enough. Just because it's interesting, like it helps to widen your perspective and understand that, oh, I never really maybe realized that. Yeah, there was a big realization one time. We were saying I was like, oh, everything is they're relatively talking about the same thing. I had never thought about that. There was a point in my life where I was like, all of a sudden, somebody said that kind of, and I understood it, and I was like, that makes a whole lot of sense. But I had never thought that like two different religions from opposite sides of the world were maybe talking about the same thing. I always thought that it was like, I don't know, do people actually think that, God is a floating guy up in, the clouds and they like other religions are thinking there's another person and maybe some people do believe that maybe it's just like a kind of a they're saying it's like a manifestation of all these other, I don't know, thoughts or ideas, but that's why I think it's important to talk about it because it's just such an interesting perspective. And spirituality can be many different things. We started talking here about like ghosts and stuff, and
Hmm.
and I still think that's part of it. It's just very widespread, and it's not a thing that we should be scared to talk about. Kind of get
Hmm.
like people. I mean, there's still times where I'm like, I don't know if I want to. Like even during this, I'm like thinking, I was like, I don't know if we should. Is this okay to talk about? But I think it's important to
Hmm.
talk about. I think we
Hmm.
need to. We're not cutting anybody down, and as long
Hmm.
as you're coming from a good place,
Hmm.
it's how we learn, I guess. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. It's so important to approach kind of everything, and especially like spirituality, religion, and everything with kind of open mindedness.
Yeah.
Being open to possibilities. Recently, I've been reading this book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Super good book, like really easy read. I've been really enjoying it. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Gotcha. It's a great. It's
Yeah.
pretty good. The Psychology of Money, and basically the first thing that he opens up with, and yes, it's a book about finance and everything, but really, like finance is really just ultimately a human psychological thing, right?
Right.
The
Yeah. Okay.
finance and the economy is just really personal finance is just human behavior and psychology, and so like it's very important to understand it in this way. And one of the things that he said in kind of chapter one, there's like 20 rules, and this is rule number one, or perhaps lesson number one that he learned. Not everyone isn't crazy is kind of like what he
Okay.
said. I think something like that, like nobody is crazy or everybody isn't crazy. Which at first I was like, what do you mean? There's definitely some crazy people out there, like I can name off the top of my head. I work with a few.
Yeah,
So,
that's so funny.
I look in the mirror. But yeah, like that's the first thing he said, like nobody is crazy. And kind of he explained it's like different people grow up in different circumstances, and contextually that informs their view of reality. For example, if you were born in the 70s, right, if you were born in the 70s, from the time that you were born the economy was just going up, right? Stocks were just going up like crazy, it tripled. It increased threefold over the span of I forget how long. And so if you were born in the 70s, you'd be like, yeah, stocks are the right choice to make, the economy
Right.
goes up. However, if you were born in the 50s, if you were born 20 years earlier, the economy literally just like did nothing. It kind of stayed flat. you know. And so
Mm.
you'd believe stocks aren't really the, stocks aren't really the move, and that's informed by kind of the environment that you were brought up in. And I think the same, like even for us, like we've been living in such like, well, what by now, like one of the longest, unpopped bull markets in history. Things are things have just been going up and stuff. And so like generally we're pretty optimistic about the market. But like let's compare that to someone who perhaps lived through the Great Depression, right?
Mhm.
We have no conceptualization of, what that is, or even the 2008 crisis. Anyways, bringing this back to, our discussion about religion, I think the same thing applies here. No one is crazy. They're simply making decisions that are contextual to what best suits them and the environment that they grew up in and what works best for them. Oftentimes I think it's easy to get caught up in a trap of like, hey, like don't lie to me. Sometimes like you see some of the things that people believe and you're like, what? Like
Yeah,
it doesn't make
of
sense.
course,
And
everybody
like,
does, yeah.
you like question it in your head is like, oh, that's dumb. That's like, what, why do you do that? But recognizing that A, they probably think the same thing about you, B, it's all contextual.
Mhm.
you know it's
Mhm.
contextual to your experience. And I think one thing that he said in the book that kind of resonated with me, and I'll pass it over to you, was that this one quote: sometimes you never fully understand something until you experience it.
Yeah,
Experience,
100%.
is necessary for full understanding.
Mhm.
Anyways, that's kind of my thought, kind of drawing a
Yeah,
parallel in. What do you think?
yeah, like, that applies to everything, not just whatever spirituality, religion we're talking about here. Um, you need to really, it's something I've realized recently and I'm trying to work on. It's not easy because it's so easy to just go, well, I don't understand it because I haven't, you haven't experienced that. I don't understand it, so it's wrong. That's
Mhm.
the easy way to do it, which makes sense, from a kind of just behavioral standpoint. It's like, okay, I don't get it, therefore it's incorrect. However, the challenge is like making the choice to try to understand it. And it's hard. I've been trying to work on it and I'm not great at it still. But for any kind of situation, it's like um well, I'm thinking even just, within my relationships, and you start to realize that okay, this bothers me about that person. I don't like the way they think. I don't like the way they act maybe in this situation. But then you just go like, why are they reacting that way? Try to like do a little, not that I'm a psychologist or anything, but just like think about why would they be reacting that way, and why would you react the way you would in that situation? Well, we've obviously had different experiences there. You know what I mean? And that's what, that's why this person, it's so hard for them to try to do this thing, and you're just like, well, it's just easy, just do it. Well, that's not how it works because you haven't lived the experience that they have that makes them react in that way. And realizing that was a big thing for me. Which sounds so simple. It sounds so simple when I say it out loud like
Mhm.
that. But it's funny because it's not like your immediate reaction, right? It's not your like what you would normally think. So that's just like a learning. As you're saying, as you grow up, you learn to understand. Which I why, saying that now, it's probably why on average, older people, seniors, are generally pretty like, um, well, they can be pretty calm and kind of understanding, on average. They're it's obviously people, so everybody's different, right? Everybody's
Mhm.
different,
I
but
thought of a
but
few grandparents.
well, that's what I'm just saying. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah, of course.
but you start to
Mhm.
understand that okay, they're 21, they don't know what's going on. It's all good. And I think that's something we learn as probably we get older, or at least we should prioritize learning as we get older. It's definitely an interesting thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. It's like even now, I think I mentioned this last time, like looking at the fact that hey, there are kids who are grown up now that were born in 2006.
No, not real.
Right, just thinking about that.
Oh, that's so
Okay,
funny.
if they were born in 2006, kids born in 2006 would be 16 this year. 2006, 4, 10, 20, plus 2, 4 plus 2, yeah, 16.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, kids born in 2000. Yeah, which is crazy to think about. And like looking at that, like even us right now, our conceptualization of that makes us feel like such boomer.
I know.
Makes us feel so old, right? But I think it's also being, like open minded to that and like realizing they're growing up in a different age, in a different context, in a different environment. And on the entire concept of open-mindedness, like, to your point, like, oftentimes, like, if I'm not careful, I can also be like really judgmental.
Mhm.
It's like,
It's
why don't
easy.
just do it.
Yeah.
I think that's part and parcel of like us like loving teaching so much.
Mm.
Sometimes, like, if our patience isn't, you know also, if our teaching isn't equally tempered with patience,
Right.
then it can easily turn into judgment.
Mhm.
you know but that's something I've been working on as well. And specifically, like, I'm gonna say, if anyone's listening, like, I'm happy to have, like, a discussion. I'm open-minded, nothing but love. Like, that's specifically how I've been kind of approaching people with different views than me, and like
Mm.
trying to think from their perspective. Like, for example, um I've made a very conscious effort to like understand, like, why do people vote for somebody like Trump, or perhaps why do people, like, understanding, like, the different things that are coming up, understanding, oh, why do people on this side think this way, and specifically the specific application of this that I've kind of been delving into and really, trying deeply to understand and empathize with, is kind of like the entire like truck thing,
Mhm.
like, the entire like, like, freedom convoy thing and everything. Like, I personally, like, disagree with lots of the things that perhaps they might be doing, perhaps some of the things that they might be presenting, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, I'm still trying to make a very conscious effort to understand them. I think
Mhm.
in the culture that we live in. I don't know how I got to this tangent. I
Oh, this
think
is
it's
perfect
just
because
on my mind.
I
Yeah.
shared something in my story today. I don't know if you saw it, which is related to this.
Gotcha. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I think in this culture that we live in currently, we live in a Twitter culture, in the sense that it's all about putting out what we think. Share this, share what
Yeah.
you think, but not a listening culture, right?
Mhm.
So many of the disagreements and issues on the global stage could just be solved by sitting down and genuinely listening and seeking to understand. And kind of that's what I've been trying to do, like, be really open-minded, like, as much as I might disagree. Like, okay, why do you think what you think? Oh, it's contextual because you grew up in this area and you saw how that influenced the economy. Okay, and then your family also had this job, and so when they got fired in their so that's what you do, that's why you do what you do. And
Right.
I think the fundamental thing that I just come to the conclusion of is, I disagree, but I still understand, you know?
That's it.
Like, disagreeing with understanding, I think
That's
that's,
what it has to be, which and if you
Mhm,
don't get to that point, that's where wars and stuff start, right? Like it's disagreeing and then just be mad about it because you don't
mhm,
understand. I don't need to read exactly what I have here, but this
mhm,
my the thing I shared today was about cancel culture essentially.
mhm.
And I'm not sure what your thoughts are. I know I can assume what your
Oh,
thoughts
I could
are.
go on and on, like, we could
Um,
do a whole episode about this, dude.
but it's kind of in this realm of what you just said.
Mhm,
I shared this morning, and it was we live in, like you see this Twitter, whatever you call it, Twitter land. That's what I'm gonna call it.
yeah, Twitter
Um,
culture.
yeah, and it's this whole thing with cancel culture too, which I didn't even know was a term until like about a year ago, and then I was like, okay, yep, that's totally a thing. Um, that there's parts of it that are understandable, I guess, in certain applications. There's also parts of it where it's like one person does one little thing, they're human, but their world's on display, their life's on display. We aren't coming from a place of understanding. We disagree with what they did. We all agree that it's wrong, probably. But we don't understand why it happened and that maybe that doesn't make up their whole character. And that's my personal problem with this whole cancel culture thing was like everybody makes mistakes, everybody has those days.
I
Everybody
know,
knows what I'm
that's
talking
literally what I
about.
thought in my head.
Um,
I was about to sing it, but then I didn't
everybody
wanna
knows
interrupt you.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
totally.
well, Hannah Montana on the
Of
podcast.
course.
But you know what I mean? Like, and it's easy to, and then we get that this particular post is talking about kind of like being part of the mob, where it's just like, that group mentality, and then everybody just hops on, and then all of a sudden everybody's on it, so you have to agree. But my point here, coming back to it, is I think we, because of the internet specifically, we this Twitter culture or whatever, um, we don't listen or try to understand as much. It's like, this is presented as fact. It's on the internet. It must be true. I'm not even going to bother thinking about the context or what this person may be experiencing or why they acted the way they did or why this happened. Now I'm not trying to be like, oh yes, I never do it. Of course I do it. It's part of the internet. It's what happens. But I think we need to, as a just group society of humans, try to reverse it because it's dangerous. It's dangerous, man. Yeah.
Completely agree. Intolerance, like anger and intolerance and canceling, is easy.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Tolerance is so much harder. Genuine understanding is hard, and that's why many people, like, that's why we often struggle to reach that place. It takes effort,
Mm-hmm.
to try to understand. It's easy to send a tweet, but it's hard to read or listen to someone who you might disagree with, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's about taking that effort, even like in our conversation today, right? Like talking about like bringing back to like supernatural stuff, like spirituality, religion, kind of cancel culture, Twitter, everything. It kind of comes back to open-mindedness and understanding.
Right.
Making the effort to understand instead of just standing on a soapbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that.
Just listening is not a. I don't know if it's has it ever been. Do you think a priority in just like history? Because I think it's just humans. We like to talk. We like to say our own thing, be heard, which is comforting, boosts
Mhm,
our ego, share our own thoughts. But I don't know. I'm just not like I don't think I don't even know. I don't think we're getting better necessarily.
mhm,
But it just I guess it's a conscious thing. It's like even, and I have to catch myself because I'll do it. But you walk up to the average person, like walk up to an average conversation that's happening, and watch the people. Usually, a couple people, when the other person's talking, they're trying to find a place where they pause so they can talk. I'm like,
mhm,
you're not listening to what they're saying. You're just
mhm,
waiting to talk. Conversation is you talk, I listen, we switch, exchange ideas. That's the whole
mhm,
point. But generally, conversations are like, you know, you talk, I talk. Neither of us listen to each other. We both just share what we want, and I feel better about myself. Yeah, right. So
mhm,
it takes an active thing, and I like on these, like it's so hard sometimes where I'm like, I have things because you present great ideas, specifically you, and I'm like,
right back
that's
at you,
awesome.
dude.
That makes me think about this. I want to say that, but I'm like, no, I gotta let me. I want to finish hearing what he's saying because it's great.
Mhm,
So it's an active thing, right? It's not passive, which is the hard part, I think, with all of this stuff. Basically, personal development in general is an active process, which is what makes it hard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
anything that's worthwhile, anything that's worth doing is not necessarily
of
easy
course.
to do. But I so relate with that. I think this is like ever since like doing this podcast with you has been like a really great exercise in just like listening, and
Mm,
like just being fully here, with
yeah.
you. Like I was actually before we recorded our first episode, I was listening to a whole bunch of like do you know I bet you know this. Do you know who Evan Carmichael is?
Yeah,
The
I got a
YouTube
story about
channel.
that. I'll tell you after.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I do.
Gotcha. Okay, so you know the YouTube channel. I was watching one of his like compilations of like Oprah, because like Oprah's, definitely someone I look up to in many regards. And one thing that she said about her interviews that kind of stood out to me that I've kind of been just like carrying, into this is that exactly to your point, lots of people usually when they enter a conversation are just waiting to speak, are thinking about what they want to say in their own head as the other person is speaking. But instead, like this has been a really great practice. Like in a way, I'm like meditating on your speaking. Like
Hmm.
I'm meditating as you're speaking, just like not having any thoughts, just like and whatever kind of response comes out as a result of that. Oh, it is what it is.
Yeah.
No, it's a practice of not thinking as you speak and just giving you the space, like, hey, present your ideas, go be amazing, like
Right.
giving you the space to, you know, yeah, you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So you said you had a story.
Yeah. No, no, no. I'll tell you after.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to share it on here, but
Oh, okay,
was
gotcha.
there anything specific that Oprah said that was kind of notable to you in that?
I don't remember the exact quote, but it was the sentiment that she shared. Is that instead of, waiting to speak or thinking about what to say, oftentimes, like, interviewers in her context, when she's interviewing people, oftentimes the interviewer is just thinking of the next question just
Right.
so that they don't stumble on their words. But instead of doing that,
Right.
just being fully here.
It makes it easier.
No listen
Like I really resonate with this, and I think this is applicable to anybody listening. If you're not interviewing people on a podcast, you have conversations. Everybody has conversations in their day. That's how we operate as humans. So apply this to your life, and I try to, like, in just average conversations, because when I first started this and I was interviewing, the goal is still like conversation. It was not necessarily an interview, but sometimes I'd like, I had questions to kind of follow or whatever. I found it really hard where I was like, I really want to listen, but I also want to like think about what to say next so I don't stumble. And when I was kind of caught in between those two, there's periods where I would totally lose my train of thought and I didn't know what to say because I was trying to practice what I was going to say. And then they said something and like asked me a question and I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for it. When I started to, like anything, the more you do it, the better you get. But I started to get more comfortable and just really try to genuinely hear what the other person's saying and then respond to it without thinking about it first. You think about it, they ask you something or they finish talking, and then you say, how does that make me feel? What do I think? Share it. And it's a weird thing that it's such a simple, like you say, talking to somebody is such a simple thing that we all do so much of, but like very few people are good at it, like myself included. It's a hard thing to do. And if you ever have a conversation with somebody who's a very good listener and or like good at having a conversation in the sense that they fully hear you, they internalize what you're saying and respond to it wholeheartedly, it's a like out of this world experience because I have a couple people in my life when that I'm able to have lucky enough to have those conversations with, and it's like it's crazy. And Oprah, Oprah's one of those people. You watch her interviews and it's just her stuff is so, she's such a good interviewer because it's not all, I'm sure it is partially pre-planned out, but it's not all just like this is exactly what's going to happen. It's natural and she's actually listening. So I think maybe it sounds like the moral of, or the takeaway from today is to listen more. It applies to everything. Yeah.
And it especially applies to this podcast. So make sure that you listen more.
That's right.
Listen more. Exactly. The entire moral of the story
was a promo.
Was an ad.
That's right. 50-minute
ad.
ad.
We were here to have a genuine conversation? No. Watch more of our podcasts. But yeah, like that's just the moral of the story. I completely agree with you. Listen to one another more. Like be open-minded and create space for one another. So yeah. So I guess on that note, in regards to listening, we'll catch you in next week's episode. Hopefully you'll stick around, listen to us more. We'll listen to you. If you have any comments, you can hit us up on Instagram at any time. We're happy to, respond to any of the things that you throw at us. Any questions that you might have, we'll be happy to include it on the show as well.
Or topics, we just need things to talk about. So sometimes it's nice to have a separate perspective. Somebody just throwing out a random idea and we'd love to talk about it. So Ameer, where can the people find you on the old internet?
You can all find me at Ameer Corro, AMEER CORRO, anywhere that you use the internet. That's Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you might find somebody. Yeah, all the places at Ameer Corro, AMEER CORRO. What about you, Mr. Harrison? Where will they find you?
Instagram at Harrison King Official, HarrisonKingOfficial.com, and YouTube.com/HarrisonKingOfficial. You can find all the good stuff right there.
Officially the best person ever.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but why don't you close us out, Ameer?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. We'll catch you next week. Live a good life, and we'll talk next time. See ya.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Visit us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Talk About Life Pod, and for more information, head on over to HarrisonKingOfficial.com/podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and have a deep, meaningful conversation in your own life.